Hey, what's up? This is H1, and we're about to be running it back with another episode. And I just like to say, hey, remember this. It's only 6 pieces to learn. Do not be afraid. Don't be anxious. Own it, bro. Own it. Only 6 pieces to learn. And then we're going to go over all these pieces today. And make sure if you don't get a piece, just rewind, go back into it, reverse it, and then like the second time around you should get it. And if you don't get it the second time around, the third time around you should get it. And if you don't get it the third time around, the fourth, just keep on going through the video until you get it. Because if you don't get it, then you can't progress in playing chess. Okay. So I think the last video, if you're going in order, I think the last video I went over how to set up the board, and then I went over all the names of the pieces. And this is not a castle, it's a rook, aka castle, but it's a rook. And this rook moves pretty good. So this rook moves horizontal, right? So it can move horizontal, it can move left to right. So up, down, left, right. That's how the rook moves. It doesn't move diagonal. No, no. Up, down, left, right, as far as you can go, as far as the 64 squares can take you. That's how far the rook can go. Up, down, left, right. No other way. It cannot jump. There's only one piece in chess that can jump, and I will tell you what piece can jump. But other than that, the rook cannot jump. Actually, let me show you how the rook can capture right quick. So let's say that you have this position and you have this board and you're looking at it right quick. The rook can only go up, left, right, down. The rook cannot go to h4 in this position. The rook cannot go to h4 because that would be passing the piece. But let's talk about how to capture on the chessboard. This is not checkers. This is far different from checkers. This is the supreme game of chess. So, with that being said, do not just like go over the piece. Like don't try to hop a piece and expect that you can do that. No. How you capture? You do rook takes g4 exclamation mark, and you put the piece on the chessboard. You take their piece off, and then their piece is no more. That piece that was captured, it's in jail forever, and you got it captured. That piece will never come on the board anymore. And that's how you capture a piece. Or you could do another move, but it cannot move diagonal. That's what would happen if you try to move a diagonal in the real game. You can move it up, down, left, right. Okay, let's talk about the next piece. The bishop. This is confusing, I know. But in the starting position, you start off with 2 bishops. 2 bishops. And the 2 bishops, they move diagonal. So there is one dark square bishop. And I think you see it right here. Right? And then there is one light square bishop. It stays on the light squares always. There is no reason why you should have 2 dark square bishops on the board, because that would be illegal. But yeah, these bishops stay on their own colors, and there's no way for this light square bishop to attack a dark square. And they move just on the diagonal. They don't go up, down, left, right like the rook. But they only move on the diagonals of the chessboard. And they can't move like this either. No, they can't do that. But they move diagonal on the chessboard. Now, I know what you've been waiting for. And let me just do the drum roll. The drum roll is the queen, the most powerful piece on the chessboard. And the simplest way to learn how the queen moves, it moves exactly like a rook and a bishop together. A rook and a bishop together. So what does that mean? What does that mean if the queen moves just like a rook and bishop together? Well, the queen can go up, down, left, left, right, and diagonal. All diagonals. And the queen can go on both colors. The queen is the most powerful piece on the chessboard for a reason, and this is why, because it can move in any direction pretty much on the chessboard as far as it can go. And the queen cannot jump. Okay, the queen does not jump on the chessboard. Let me repeat that. The queen can go up, down, left, right, all diagonals. And that's how the queen moves. Powerful piece. Use it wisely. Now the next piece, the knight, aka pony. AKA pony. The knight is a little bit difficult. The knight is a little bit difficult. And I was saying, like, you need to go back if you don't get it. But this is how the knight moves. It moves in a capital L shape. So it goes 2 up and 1 to the side, any direction. 2 up and 1 to the side, any direction. 2 right, 1 to the side, any direction. You see the capital L that is forming? Now let's do the other ones. 2 to the bottom, left and right, 1 square. So it's always 2, 1. 2 squares, 1. And it's always a capital L. Always. There's no reason why it should be anything else but a capital L. And don't go too far. Don't go like 3 squares. It's always 2 squares. Like, actually hop the knight. 1, 2, and 1 to the right or left. You get to decide on the last portion, right or left. Be in the eyes of the knight. And let's talk about the knight being on the edge. So, what squares would it be if you was moving the knight? Let's say that we was trying to move the knight on A1. What is the only squares this knight can move to? What is the only squares this knight can move to? Well, this knight on A1 can move to B3 or C2. 2 to the right, up 1. 2 up, 1 right. Because it can't go left because there's no space to the left. And it can't go down, going to the C2 square because there's no space down here. Okay, now let's see how many squares this knight on H4 can go. Do you know? Can you name the squares? Well, if you got these squares, then you are awesome because it is G6, F5, F3, G2. These squares are where the knight can go. Now, there's one major difference I wanted you to see is that the knight in the center can go to how many squares? It can go to 8 squares. The knight on the edge can only go to 2 squares. And the knight kind of in the center but still on the edge can go to 4 squares. So I want you to get this for when you're playing chess on your own, is that the knight on the rim is dim. The knight on the rim sucks. It's garbage. It can't move to that many squares, so your knight should always be near the center where it can move to the limit of 8 squares. With the knight on the edge, it can't do this best. Dang, I can't even talk. But it can't do its best job. So why would you put a pony on the edge when you can have a unicorn in the center? Okay, so how to capture with this knight, which This knight is the only piece that can hop squares. This knight is the only piece that can hop squares. So this knight can go 2 right here and 1 to the right, and we can capture this piece. We can capture that pawn on d5. And I can decide not to capture it. I can go to knight b5. So you see this? Those are all the squares the knight can go to. Actually, I didn't even need to do that. These are all the squares the knight can go to. So I can capture the rook, and you know how to capture, right? So we're going to hop 2 squares, 1 to the side, capital L. We're going to take the piece. The piece is ours now. The piece is in jail forever. And we're going to place our piece on that square of which we captured. And there you go. That's how you do it. Okay, next piece. The next piece is the pawn. The pawn is last for a reason, even though it's the weakest piece on the board. But it could be complicated. Let me explain. First of all, this pawn on the starting position on the second rank, it can either move 1 square up or 2 squares. So you have the option of moving the pawn 1 square or 2 squares. If you move it 1, then the pawn can only move 1 after that. It can't move 2 squares anymore. Now, if you wanted to move the pawn 2 squares in the beginning, that's fine. You can do that. If the pawn has not moved from its starting position, then you can move 2 squares. But after that, you can only move 1 square. Now, how pawns captures is really different from how they move. The pawns can only capture 1 square diagonal. The pawns can only capture 1 square diagonal. So it's kind of like a bishop, but a really limited bishop. 1 square. Only capture. So in this position right here, I can move up. That is an option. But if I wanted to capture a piece, I can capture the D pawn, since it's diagonal from me. And then if I skip the move, my opponent can capture me back with their pawn going diagonal. Okay? Or they can move up 1 square. The pawns are very slow creatures. Imagine a pawn, a turtle. It's just a small turtle. Imagine a pawn, a turtle going on a highway. You know what I mean? It's still going to go slow. Even though a lot of action is going to be happening on the chessboard, just like a highway, the turtle's not going to go any faster. It's going to go as slow as possible, and it might crawl up in its little shell, but the turtle is still going to be going pretty slow. And that's how the pawn is. It's basically it's a turtle. That's why it's the weakest piece on the board. Now, one thing I want to talk about right now, instead of waiting later, is promotion. Now, when a pawn reaches all the way to the 8th rank, and it's like, oh snap, I finally did it. I won a marathon. Yeah, I got through it, and I'm in the enemy's camp, and I'm going to get a reward. Yeah, 1st place, yeah. What's the reward? What's the reward? Well, the reward for the pawn is turned into 4 pieces. The 4 pieces the pawn could turn into is the queen, the knight, the rook, the bishop. Those are the 4 pieces the pawn can turn into. It cannot turn into a pawn again. It cannot turn into a king. But only the queen, the knight, the bishop, the rook. And once it turns to a queen, which is the most powerful piece on the board, usually you want to turn that pawn to a queen. If you do reach the end, then it's cool. We're good. And it's still moving 1 square up. So the pawn have a special power. Once it gets to the end, then you're all good. You're Gucci. You know? because you can promote that pawn from the weakest piece to the strongest piece. You started from the bottom, and now you're here. Now, the last piece you want to learn about, and there's another special thing you can learn about the pawn, but I'm going to have that as a separate video. I just wanted to say that. And that's called en passant. It's probably going to be in the next video. But let's learn about the king. The king is the most important piece on the board, and it can move one square like a pawn, but it can move one square any direction. One square any direction. So it can move up, down, left, right, diagonal. One square. It can't move any other square, just one square each direction. And that's pretty much it. You can't, like, the king is just as slow as the pawn, but at least the king has a little bit more flexibility. Now, the king is the most important, so the king has a lot more rules than any other piece. For example, you have to know what check is. Check is when the king is being attacked, and the king is like, oh no! Oh my goodness, I'm being attacked. What am I going to do? And the king starts freaking out and start hyperventilating and things of that nature. And the king is like, oh, I got to get out of danger. So check is when the king is being attacked. For example, the rook right now, which moves up, down, left, right. So the rook is attacking the king to the left. The king is in trouble. Oh no! The king is in trouble. What are we going to do? When the king is in check, you have to get out of check your next move. You have to get out of check your next move. So you have to get away from the danger. The king has 6 options, but 2 options are called illegal moves. So the king cannot go to e4 and the king cannot go to c4 because the rook is still attacking the king on the 4th rank. But these squares, the king can go to run away from the rook. So every move, you can't do no other move but get out of check when you're being in check. The whole game stops until you get your king out of check. Now, if it was your move, if you see this position, I cannot move up at all. This king cannot go on the 5th rank at all because this rook is covering the 5th rank. So imagine a imaginary electric fence, and the king gets buzzed every single time you try to move it up because it's an illegal move. It cannot happen on the board. You cannot do that on a chessboard. Another thing that's illegal is the kings cannot touch because the kings attack on every direction, right? So if the kings go near each other, they will be attacking each other, and that's a illegal move. That is a illegal move. Okay, one other thing I want to teach you, and like after you watch this video, you should be ready to just play a simple game. But there's a lot more to learn in the beginner rate, in the beginner level. But you have to know what checkmate is. Checkmate. So we know what check is, right? We know what check is. Check is when the king's being attacked. Checkmate is when the king is being attacked, but the king cannot get out of the attacks at all. There's no way for the king to get away from danger. So it's checkmate. For example, the king is on d1. So if the queen goes to d2, this is checkmate because the queen is attacking the king. The queen can move any direction. The king cannot capture the queen because the king right here is protecting the queen. And you remember the kings cannot touch at all. Another checkmate in this position will be here. The queen is attacking the king on the 1st rank. The king cannot go up at all because the black king is covering those squares, and the black king cannot touch. So this is an example of what checkmate looks like. Okay, but other than that, I think that's how all the pieces move. So if you can remember how all the pieces move, then you can play a chess game. If you want to go back into these, if you want to go back into each piece, to the rook, the bishop, the queen, then I'll go back into it. The knight and pawn is probably going to be a weird piece to get used to, but once you get used to it, then it's pretty obvious. It's going to be you're going to be pretty cool. And then the king, the only thing that's kind of complicated when I was beginning chess was the illegal moves part, because if you do an illegal move, then you're breaking the rules of the game. So just go back into the video, watch it again. It's explanatory. I explain everything correctly, so don't worry about that. I didn't mess up at all. And you should be good to play your own game on chess.com or Elite Chess. That's pretty much all the knowledge you need to know for now to play a full chess game. So, with that being said, thank you for joining H1 as we talk about chess knowledge, chess boards, and chess understanding. And we ran it back with another episode, so that's pretty dope. Let's go to the next episode with learning about it's either gonna be en passant or some checkmate. I don't know. I don't even know if you're bouncing around or not. So yeah, I'll see you again. I will see you again.